Howard Hughes. You wake up to a headline about an eccentric tycoon, and the first thing that hits you is how strange his life turned out to be. He was the pilot who broke records, the engineer who drew radical planes, and the owner of one of the most secretive defense contractors in the world. He built wings that pushed the limit of speed. Then he withdrew from the world until his body became a rumor factory. Officially, he died of kidney failure in 1976, after years of isolation and illness. The medical record and eyewitness accounts point at poor health and a mind worn thin by obsessive habits. But there is another thread running through his story that keeps conspiracy forums alive to this day. His company worked on classified radar systems and early satellite communications. Employees swore that some projects never saw public light. Contracts sealed with government stamps left gaps in the public record. When a man controls factories, prototypes, and classified contracts, people start asking what else he might have had in a hangar or behind a locked door. After his death, there were whispered reports of blueprints and prototype parts turning up in storage rooms. Some engineers said designs existed that looked nothing like standard aircraft. Other voices suggested the secrecy was all standard Cold War practice, not proof of erased breakthroughs. Here is the balance most people miss. The record shows real classified work. The record also shows a man collapsing under physical and mental strain. That combination creates a perfect storm for rumor. Still, a handful of documents released years later hinted at projects few journalists had tracked. Those files do not prove the wildest claims. They do, however, make the question harder to dismiss. Those storage rooms yielded something else, too. Engineers found faded blueprints with odd annotations, notes scribbled in margins. A few prototype parts turned up behind crates marked for scrap. One memo, later declassified, described a radar module that did not match any public system. Another file hinted at experiments with novel propulsion concepts. None of it proves a miraculous machine. It does show a company experimenting at the edge of what was public. It also shows how classified work can create knowledge gaps. When something sits behind sealed contracts and secrecy rules, rumors rush in to fill the empty spaces. Family members and some former employees told different stories. Some remembered a restless man obsessed with perfection. Others insisted there were meetings with military officials that felt unusually private. Journalists later traced procurement records and found odd purchases and subcontractors that did not appear on public lists. Investigators drilled into shipping logs. They found crates moved at odd hours, destinations listed as military facilities. That paperwork does not equal crime. It does suggest a ledger of secrets. So why did the rumors grow so big after his death? Part of the answer is simple. When a powerful man dies suddenly while owning classified projects, the public wants a single explanation. Natural decline is not dramatic. A conspiracy is. Online forums multiplied the wildest interpretations. They linked vague documents to imagined tech, and then to imagined motives. Still, a smaller number of rigorous historians went back to the archives. They found that a few real, narrow projects had been delayed, reclassified, or absorbed into other programs after his illness. Those moves left gaps. Gaps always get filled. Ask yourself a question whenever a billionaire dies amid secrecy. Who benefits from silence? Who can move prototypes off the books? Those are the hard questions that survive the rumors and the half-truths. What happened behind those hangar doors changed the story more than the obituaries did. Robert Maxwell, you read that a powerful publisher vanished from his yacht, and the sea returned an unanswered question. He disappeared off the coast near Tenerife on November 5, 1991. The official finding was accidental drowning. The public reaction was something else entirely. He ran a media empire with newspapers and publishers in many cities. He had contacts in intelligence circles, and he moved money and influence with unusual confidence. After his body was recovered, investigators opened the books, and the books did not look clean. Pension funds were empty. Companies that once paid suppliers suddenly listed strange contractors. The discovery of missing money turned grief into scandal almost overnight. Journalists then chased another shadow. Former employees told reporters about meetings with men who never appeared on public lists. They spoke of private briefings and sealed procurement files. Some contracts were redacted. Some shipping records listed only generic military destinations. Those dry facts were fertile ground for faster stories. Conspiracy channels linked the missing money to secret files, and then to alleged technologies. Stories claimed he kept proof of surveillance schemes and media manipulation tools that others feared to use. No single document proved a grand suppression. Declassified intelligence notes show contact with agencies, but nothing that confirms a revenge or cover-up plot. What the records do show are gaps where logs should be, contracts without full signatures, a pattern of shadow subcontractors that later became part of state programs. When a month of odd entries meets a lifetime of secrecy, the imagination rushes to fill the empty cells. The result was a legend that outlived the audit and colored every later leak. They found more than empty pension sheets. Late night at a small office, an auditor flipped through stapled invoices by the dim light of a desk lamp. The invoices had stamps that matched military procurement codes. A shipping clerk named in the files would not return calls. An ex-editor remembered a night when the owner called and asked for a story to be buried. A defense contractor who had worked with the company later told a reporter that a crate labeled office equipment arrived and then disappeared into a government warehouse. Declassified cables show meetings with foreign intelligence partners. The cables do not say that anything illegal was traded. They do say that information moved in ways that left little public trace. That pattern is what fuels the hardest claims. Online sleuths assembled timelines that put missing funds next to redacted contracts, and then to a list of private devices that never made it into patents. The timeline is compelling in a documentary montage. It is also a chain of inference, not a court record. Listen to the human side. An engineer who asked for anonymity said he was asked to work on systems that monitored media flows. He said the work felt like building a microscope for influence. A former aide says he once saw a demonstration of software that mapped contacts across nations. Those accounts are not proof of a global suppression. They are testimony that secret capability existed in the periphery of a media empire. So what remains? Paperwork that points to shadow subcontractors, witnesses who remember closed-door meetings, and a public scandal that swallowed a career. The ledger closed. The sea kept its last silence. Edmund Safra, the banker who built fortunes in silence and died in smoke and confusion. Safra passed away on December 3, 1999, trapped inside his Monaco penthouse as fire consumed the building. The official investigation concluded it was arson committed by a male nurse seeking attention. The nurse confessed and served time, but the circumstances left uncomfortable questions hanging in the air like smoke that never quite dissipates. Safra ran Republic National Bank and Trade Development Bank, institutions that moved billions across borders. He maintained relationships with intelligence services, had clients whose identities remained deliberately obscure, and operated in the shadows where legitimate banking meets geopolitical maneuvering. His banks handled transactions for Russian oligarchs during the chaotic privatization years. They processed money for clients who valued discretion above all else. When you move that kind of capital for that kind of clientele, you accumulate knowledge that makes people nervous. The fire itself reads like a thriller plot gone wrong. Security systems that should have worked failed. Communications were disrupted. Safra locked himself in a bathroom with a nurse, sealing the door with towels, and died from smoke inhalation, despite being in a building with multiple exits. Investigators found accelerant. They found the nurse's confession. What they didn't find was a satisfactory explanation for why one of the world's most security-conscious men died in a preventable tragedy. Former employees spoke carefully about the months before his death. They mentioned unusual pressure from Russian business interests. They recalled encrypted communications and late-night meetings. One security consultant noted that Safra had increased his protection detail and changed his routines, behaviors that suggested he felt threatened. Financial forensics revealed something else. Transactions that passed through his banks in the months before the fire involved shell companies and offshore accounts, later connected to money laundering investigations. Some of those investigations were quietly closed after his death. The conspiracy theories write themselves. a banker who knew too much, clients with the resources to silence witnesses, a convenient arson that removed a problematic figure while leaving plausible deniability intact. The sober facts are these. Safra died in a fire set by someone who confessed, but fires can be commissioned. Confessions can be coerced or purchased. And when someone moves billions for powerful clients, their death creates a vacuum that someone must fill. So the question remains suspended like ash in still air. Did Edmund Safra die because a disturbed employee sought attention, or because he possessed information that made his continued existence inconvenient for people who operate beyond the reach of ordinary law? Paul Allen. You remember the quiet co-founder who stepped back from the spotlight and poured money into everything from spaceplanes to brain science. He helped build a software empire and then used his fortune to buy labs, rockets, and research teams. He funded a private air launch project, a huge aircraft that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film. He created institutes that hired top AI researchers. He backed biotech startups that promised faster drug discovery. When he died in 2018, the world saw obituaries and foundation statements. The official cause was complications of non-Hodgkin lymphoma. The public record shows donations, patents, and companies that continued under new leadership. It also shows something ordinary and disruptive. When large private projects lose their champion, work can pause. Contracts are renegotiated. Prototype hardware sits in warehouses. That pause opened room for stories. A procurement ledger leaked to an independent reporter listed transfers to a military research partner. Some subcontractor invoices used obscure shell names. A former employee, speaking anonymously, said a team was working on a machine learning model that could predict material failure before tests were run. Another source described a private server cluster moved overnight to a secure facility. Those details are intriguing. They are not proof that a suppressed technology was hidden from the world. They are evidence that high-end, privately funded work can be opaque. The stronger question is practical. When a patron dies, who decides which projects finish and which get shelved? That decision can quietly shape what the public eventually knows. After the memorial and the press statements, the labs fell into a strange silence. Equipment that had hummed day and night went dark. Rows of servers sat unplugged under plastic tarps. A facilities manager cataloged boxes and found a shipment manifest that listed destinations with generic government codes. An outside auditor traced some assets to contractors who later took government research subcontracts. Engineers remember a handover period when teams were told to pack prototypes and return home. One researcher, speaking on condition of anonymity, described a stack of printed models that had been moved to a secure storage facility 2 hours after the phone call from headquarters. Another recalled that certain machine learning models were archived and encrypted before anyone knew what had happened. Publicly owned ventures carried on. Some companies absorbed staff and patents. Foundations redirected grants and renamed institutes. That public continuity masks private stops and starts. Private donors can choose which projects continue, and other actors can acquire assets quietly, away from headlines and patent offices. Conspiracy channels built narratives from those facts. They pointed to the manifest, the anonymous recollections, and the overnight moves. They linked them to big promises and asked why some projects slowed while others accelerated under different leadership. The mainstream answer is simple. Money dries up, leadership changes, priorities shift. The more provocative answer is more human. A patron dies, and the people who loved their ideas must sell, shelve, or surrender them. Which projects were archived and which were quietly absorbed by larger programs? Who decided the fate of those machines and models? Steve Jobs. You picture the keynote stage, the black turtleneck, the spotlight, and the product that feels like magic. He transformed whole industries and then quietly left them when he died in 2011. The official accounts list complications from pancreatic disease. The public remembers launches and product cycles, but not every lab or every prototype behind those launches. Inside the company, there were rooms that even some employees never entered. Engineering teams worked on concepts that never reached the store shelves. Some projects were shelved for market reasons. Others were folded into successor products. After his death, a few engineers told reporters about sealed folders and code repositories locked behind multiple approvals. One former designer described a prototype device with sensors that behaved oddly good at predicting user intent. He said the demo felt years ahead. Corporate records include routine secrecy clauses and heavy non-disclosure agreements. They also include unusual vendor names on invoices during product transitions. Procurement logs list hardware transfers to secure facilities. Those transfers look ordinary to auditors who deal with supply chain. To others, they look like things moved out of sight. Perspectives split. Industry veterans say the company was simply ruthless about product focus, and shelving was normal. Insiders and forum communities claim the timing of some project cancellations, and leadership shifts suggests more than business sense at work. They point to archived code, to patent filings that never matured, and to hardware frames that vanished into storage. So, the central question hangs heavy and simple. When a visionary dies, who decides which inventions see the light and which quietly disappear into a corporate archive? After the public memorial, the quiet work continued behind sealed doors. An internal memo shows code repositories marked for archival and encryption. A senior engineer described a night when teams were told to push their latest builds to a secure server and then go home. He said managers changed passwords and flagged the code for restricted access. That kind of move is normal in corporate reorganizations. It is also the moment when innovation can slip from view. Patent searches turned up filings that never matured into products. Some patent applications list sensor arrays and intent prediction algorithms that read like the demos engineers once ran in closed rooms. Those filings later lapsed, or were reassigned to shell entities. Procurement logs show crates of prototype hardware shipped to secure facilities with vague addresses. An equipment manager confirmed that some items went to third-party labs under non-disclosure arrangements. Voices divide. Corporate spokespeople point to routine portfolio pruning and strategic focus. They say projects are shelved when they do not fit the roadmap. Former engineers and industry watchers tell a different story. They speak of demos that made executives nervous. They tell of pressure to pivot away from ideas that would disrupt existing revenue streams. The practical truth sits between those views. Companies decide what to finish and what to bury. When a founder dies, the decision moves from a single vision to many hands. Those hands may choose public benefit or private control. So the final question is sharp and simple. When a visionary exits, who holds the key to the code and the prototypes, and who gets to open that lock? Jeffrey Epstein. You know the name and the furious stream of headlines that followed his death in custody. He died on August 10, 2019. The official ruling was suicide by hanging in a federal detention center. That finding sparked immediate outrage and suspicion. People asked how a man with such extreme access could die inside a facility with cameras and guards. They asked what he might have known and whom he might have named. Epstein cultivated relationships with billionaires, academics, and politicians. He funded private research and owned properties where high-level meetings reportedly occurred. After his death, investigators cataloged boxes of records. Some boxes were dense with guest lists, travel logs, and bank transfers. Other materials were described in press accounts as hard drives and encrypted files. Those items fueled online investigators who promised that buried inside were more than social calendars. Perspective splits quickly. Law enforcement officials focused on procedure failures in the jail and on ensuring prosecutions for his network. Journalists dug through sleeve numbers and flight logs. Conspiracy voices assembled timelines that stitched together alleged meetings and unusual transfers to private labs. Tech claimants pointed to invoices and suggested that proprietary work might have been traded among elites. The sober gap is always the same. Documents existed and records showed contact with powerful people. Documents do not equal proof of suppressed wonder technologies. Still, the question hangs heavy. What would someone of his access know about privately funded projects and secret transfers that the public never sees? David Rockefeller. You see a calm man at the head of long tables in photos that ran for decades. He died on March 21, 2017. He lived to be 101, and he built a legacy of banks, foundations, and international institutions. He chaired foundations that set research priorities, and he had seats on councils that steered global policy. Those roles matter because money decides which experiments survive. The Rockefeller Foundation funded medical research, public health, and scientific initiatives for much of the 20th century. It also funded programs that shaped agricultural technology and energy research. Documents in public archives show grant calls and priority lists that directed millions of dollars to particular fields. Those are verifiable facts. Conspiracy narratives jump from influence to suppression. They claim that elite financiers coordinated to bury disruptive technologies that would threaten existing economic systems. Critics point to patterns. A promising project falls short of funding. A startup with a radical clean energy idea fails to scale. The pattern feeds suspicion. Investigative historians counter with a different view. They note complexity. Funding decisions follow risk assessments, politics, and institutional priorities. They also point out instances where foundations funded controversial or underdog science. Still, there are anecdotes worth noting. A lab director once told a reporter that a grant application for unorthodox energy research never reached review. An archivist found meeting minutes where competing priorities moved budgets away from certain exploratory programs. Those fragments are not proof of a grand suppression plot. They are proof that choices were made and that those choices shaped what technology saw the light. So the sharper question is this: when financial power sits at the center of science, who decides what gets a chance and what quietly withers? An archivist in a gray reading room pulled a slim binder from a labeled shelf and laid it on the table. The binder held meeting minutes and grant approvals from decades of foundation work. At first, the pages read like routine governance. Then a pattern emerged. Budget lines moved. Programs were prioritized or deprioritized across cycles. Annotations in the margins noted competing priorities and donor preferences. The Rockefeller Foundation did fund medical research and public health. It also made strategic choices about agriculture and energy. Those are facts you can read in annual reports. What historians found in archives were minutes where a small group discussed risks. One note read that a proposal was not recommended because it was too speculative for current priorities. Another file shows a grant redirected to a large established lab with a safer track record. Those decisions are normal philanthropy. They are also decisions that close doors. An industry analyst who reviewed the archives said funding is the oxygen of research. Remove it, and even promising teams struggle. A lab director told a reporter that a radical energy proposal was never scheduled for peer review after an early committee decision. That anecdote does not prove a coordinated cover-up. It does show how access to funds can determine outcomes. So, the final image is simple and unsettling. A small group in a conference room moves dollars on a spreadsheet, and a project goes quiet. That quiet is where forgotten inventions end. The sharper question is this: when concentrated wealth sets priorities for science, who gets to decide what the future will be and what quietly dies on the shelf? Alfred Herrhausen. The Deutsche Bank chairman who spoke about debt forgiveness for developing nations and died in a fireball 30 days later. Herrhausen was killed on November 30th, 1989, when a sophisticated bomb destroyed his armored Mercedes in Bad Homburg, Germany. The Red Army faction claimed responsibility. The investigation accepted this narrative, but the execution was too clean, too professional, too perfectly timed for a group that typically operated with more chaos than precision. Herrhausen wasn't just a banker. He was reshaping how capital flowed through a reunifying Germany. He advocated for massive debt relief for third world nations, a position that threatened the existing order of international finance. He spoke about stakeholder capitalism before it became a corporate buzzword. He wanted German banks to serve society, not just shareholders. Those ideas made him dangerous to people who profit from debt servitude and financial extraction. The bomb itself revealed technical sophistication that surprised investigators. It used a photoelectric beam trigger, a device that required knowledge of the target's route, timing, and vehicle specifications. The explosive was shaped to pierce armor. The placement was perfect. This wasn't an amateur operation. Former intelligence officers noted uncomfortable details. The attack came during a period when East German Stasi files were being hastily purged before reunification. Some of those files documented Western financial networks and their relationships with intelligence services. Herrhausen had access to those networks and understood their mechanisms. The Red Army faction was a convenient scapegoat. By 1989, the group was fragmented and infiltrated. Using their name provided cover while obscuring who actually benefited from Herrhausen's death. And the benefits were clear. His debt forgiveness plans died with him. The financial system he wanted to reform continued unchanged. Investigators found evidence that was never fully explained. Witnesses reported surveillance teams in the area days before the attack. One neighbor noticed a van with equipment near the bombing site. That van disappeared. Security camera footage from nearby buildings went missing. The official file closed quickly. Too quickly for an assassination of such precision and political significance. Financial forensics revealed something else. In the months before his death, Herrhausen had been analyzing capital flows through suspicious channels. He'd made inquiries about shell companies and offshore accounts. He was asking questions about how money moved through systems designed to obscure its origins and destinations. Those questions threatened people who operate in financial shadows. When someone with his position and knowledge starts pulling threads, entire networks become vulnerable. The conspiracy theories here have substance. This wasn't a random act of terrorism. It was a professional hit disguised as political violence. The question isn't whether powerful interests wanted Herrhausen silenced. The question is which specific interests arranged it, and why the investigation never pursued those leads. So the hard truth remains. A banker who challenged the global debt system died in an explosion that ended his reforms and preserved the status quo. Sometimes the conspiracy isn't theory. Sometimes it's just business. Jimi Heselden, the self-made millionaire who built a fortune manufacturing blast protection barriers and died riding off a cliff on a Segway. Heselden died on September 26, 2010, near his estate in West Yorkshire, England. The official verdict was accidental death. The irony was too perfect for the internet to ignore. A man who owned the Segway company died on a Segway. But the circumstances were stranger than the headline suggested. Heselden made his money from the Hesco Bastion, a collapsible wire mesh container lined with fabric that, when filled with sand or dirt, could stop bullets and shrapnel. Military forces around the world used his barriers. He sold protection to armies operating in places where protection meant survival. That business brought him into contact with defense contractors, military procurement offices, and security agencies. It also brought him knowledge of where those barriers were deployed and what they protected. Bases, facilities, projects that didn't appear in press releases. He bought Segway Inc. in December 2009, less than a year before his death. The acquisition seemed odd to industry observers. Why would a defense contractor diversify into personal transportation? The official explanation was that he saw commercial potential and wanted to revive the brand. But Segway technology had applications beyond tourism and mall security. The self-balancing mechanism, the gyroscopic sensors, the control systems, all had potential military applications. Autonomous vehicles, robotic platforms, reconnaissance devices. The technology could be adapted. The day he died, Heselden was riding a Segway on his estate. He went over a cliff into the river wharf. The drop was about 30 feet. The police investigation concluded he lost control while reversing to let a dog walker pass. That explanation satisfied the official inquiry. It didn't satisfy people who understood how Segways work. The devices have multiple safety features. They're designed to prevent exactly this kind of accident. For an experienced rider to lose control so catastrophically suggests either catastrophic equipment failure or something else entirely. No detailed mechanical analysis was released publicly. The Segway was recovered, but the findings were summarized rather than published in full. That gap left room for questions. Former employees at his defense company spoke carefully about projects in development. They mentioned autonomous systems and remote-operated devices. One engineer described work on self-stabilizing platforms for rugged terrain. Those projects continued after his death under new ownership and military contracts. The timing troubles careful observers. Heselden died just as his companies were positioned at the intersection of defense technology and commercial robotics. His death transferred control and ended his personal oversight of projects that might have gone in directions others found uncomfortable. The hard question is this: when someone owns technology with military applications and dies in a highly unlikely accident involving that same technology, who benefits from not asking harder questions about what happened? Sometimes an accident is just an accident. Sometimes it's a convenient way to remove someone who knew too much or controlled too much. The investigation closed. The companies moved forward. The questions remain. Michael Hastings. You remember his byline and the way his reporting pulled the curtain back on power. He died in a high-speed crash outside Los Angeles on June 18, 2013. Authorities said the car accelerated and struck a palm tree and a light pole before bursting into flames. The official investigation concluded there was no foul play. The report pointed to speed and a probable mechanical failure. That did not stop people from asking hard questions. Hastings covered the military and intelligence communities. He was working on stories that touched on surveillance programs and private security contractors. After his death, online investigators noted unusual patterns in the wreckage photographs and in the telemetry shared by the manufacturer. They asked whether a car could be hacked or remotely controlled. Engineers caution against quick jumps. Modern vehicles have complex electronics, and failures can cascade. Crash investigators pointed to tire and wheel analysis and to telemetry that matched a high-speed impact. Still, some witnesses described the car as accelerating with no driver control, and others said the vehicle burst into flame almost instantly. Those descriptions create a sense of anomaly that the official files struggle to erase. Journalists and forensic experts differ in tone. Some say the accident is tragic and explainable. Others say anomalies deserve deeper review, and that a reporter with dangerous contacts might face unusual risks. The stronger claim needs stronger proof. Documents and lab reports are what move allegations from rumor to fact. So the final question lands hard. When a journalist chasing dark networks dies suddenly, who holds the evidence and who decides whether the record is complete or quietly closed? Witnesses described a scene that reads like a snapshot from a film. A sports car shredded against a tree, fire licking the pavement, a single occupant taken in minutes. Investigators noted that the vehicle reached extremely high speed before impact. The official file found no clear evidence of another vehicle striking from behind. The site report emphasized impact dynamics and mechanical failure as possible causes. Still, anomalies kept the story alive. Photographs showed the front wheels skewed in odd angles. Some observers noted blackened wiring in odd places. A few online forensic groups published analyses of burned components and argued that sudden electrical events could cause runaway throttle. Automotive engineers pushed back. They explained how post-impact fire and thermal damage alter electronics and make after-the-fact interpretation difficult. Burned wiring can mean many things. It rarely proves remote manipulation on its own. Manufacturer telemetry that was later discussed in forums did not yield a smoking gun. The automaker released limited statements, and the crash investigation remained with local authorities. Journalists asked whether a reporter digging into powerful networks could face heightened danger. Some experts urged caution and called for full, transparent release of forensic data. Others warned that incomplete data spawns endless speculation. The sober conclusion is narrow and unsettling. Records exist, and fragments point in different directions. But fragments are not proof. When investigative work collides with sudden death, the strongest evidence is the record. So the hard question is this: who safeguards the records, and who decides if the investigation is truly complete or conveniently closed? Let me know in the comments.